Some loves don't collapse. They don't explode. They don't end in betrayal, cruelty, or hatred. They simply expire. Not because the love was weak, but because it stayed too long in a life that was changing too fast. Because sometimes staying together doesn't save love. Sometimes it destroys it. They didn't separate because they stopped caring. They separated because caring started to cost them who they were becoming. Choosing between who you love and who you're meant to become. Most people don't fall in love when life is stable. They fall in love when they're uncertain, when they're unfinished, when they're still proving something to themselves. Love in those moments feels like oxygen. It feels like someone finally sees you before the world decides whether you matter. And that's what made this connection dangerous. Because both of them were standing on the edge of their own becoming. Both of them were hungry for more. Both of them were afraid of ending up ordinary. Love didn't arrive to complete them. It arrived to witness them, to sit beside the doubt, to soften the fear, to make the waiting bearable. And for a while, it worked. They weren't building a future yet. They were surviving the present. In 2016, the city of Los Angeles, California was crowded with people chasing futures they couldn't afford to quit. Two of those people were Julian Carter and Elena Morales. They didn't know each other yet. They were already exhausted. Julian was 29 years old. He lived in Echo Park, in a narrow second-floor apartment above a laundromat that smelled like detergent and warm metal. His rent was late more often than he admitted. By day, Julian worked as a music coordinator for a small production studio, editing background tracks, adjusting sound levels, doing work no one noticed. By night, he played piano. Julian was obsessed with traditional jazz composition, the kind built on restraint, patience, and emotional honesty. Everyone told him the same thing. Jazz doesn't sell like it used to. You should modernize. People want fast, catchy, simple. Julian didn't argue. He just didn't comply. To him, compromising the music felt worse than failing. And failure had already been sitting with him for years. Elena was 27. She lived in North Hollywood, sharing a 2-bedroom apartment with 2 other women, chasing similar futures. She worked mornings at a coffee shop near Burbank, memorizing orders while practicing monologues under her breath. Elena was an aspiring actress, chasing confirmation. She attended auditions 3 to 4 times a week. Most ended the same way. A polite smile. We'll be in touch. Silence. She tracked her auditions in a notebook. Dates, roles, outcomes. The notebook was mostly empty of wins. Elena told herself it was temporary, but temporary, when stretched long enough, starts to feel personal. They met on a Tuesday night, at a small performance venue in Silver Lake that regularly ran behind schedule. Julian was scheduled to play piano for a short experimental set. Elena was there because a friend invited her after another rejection-heavy day. A technical issue delayed everything. People grew restless. Julian sat at the piano waiting. Elena stood near the back, watching. Neither planned to meet anyone that night. That's usually how the most important encounters happen. They talked not flirtatiously, not dramatically. They talked like people who recognized exhaustion in each other. Julian mentioned music that didn't fit the industry. Elena mentioned auditions that went nowhere. No promises, no sparks, just relief. What Julian and Elena didn't realize that night was that they were about to become the most important support system in each other's lives. Right before life demanded, they become something else entirely. Every love story has a moment that looks harmless, a decision that feels small, a choice that seems temporary, a connection that feels safe. This was theirs, and it happened before either of them realized how expensive safety could become. Julian and Elena didn't exchange dramatic promises that night in Silver Lake. They exchanged something more dangerous. Understanding. A few days later, Julian invited Elena to watch him rehearse at a shared studio space near downtown Los Angeles. The building was old, the walls thin, the hallways smelled like dust and ambition. Julian played pieces he hadn't shown anyone, unfinished compositions, music without applause. Elena listened the way casting directors never did, without scanning, without judging, without rushing. She didn't pretend to understand jazz theory. She understood effort. That mattered more. Soon, their meetings formed a pattern. Early mornings at a 24-hour diner on Sunset Boulevard where Julian brought sheet music and Eleanor brought audition sides. They didn't call them dates, they called them breaks. Breaks from waiting, explaining. Being evaluated, Julian talked about how producers wanted him to simplify. Elena talked about how casting directors wanted her to be more marketable. Different industries, same pressure. They weren't dreaming together yet. They were surviving side by side. There is a point where comfort becomes reliance. It happened quietly. Julian stopped questioning his stubbornness because Elena never asked him to change. Elena stopped doubting her worth because Julian never treated her like a temporary option. They didn't fix each other. They stabilized each other. And stabilization can feel like love. They started planning their weeks around each other, not officially, not deliberately, just naturally. And that's when danger enters. The city never lets you forget reality for long. Julian's studio job cut his hours. Elena's coffee shop reduced shifts. The bills didn't care about dreams. Stress crept into their conversations. Not as arguments, as silence. Julian spent longer hours practicing, chasing opportunities that didn't pay yet. Elena doubled auditions, chasing validation that didn't arrive. They were exhausted in different directions. But they met in the middle at night, on Elena's apartment floor, on Julian's fire escape. Love became a pause button, and pause buttons don't stop time. One night, Julian mentioned an offer. A producer liked his playing but wanted changes. More rhythm, less restraint, more audience appeal. It paid well. Elena encouraged him to consider it, not because she believed in the compromise, but because she believed in survival. Julian hesitated. This wasn't betrayal yet. This was the first bend. And bends, once accepted, have a habit of multiplying. Neither of them knew it yet, but the relationship had crossed an invisible line. From support to sacrifice. From love as shelter to love as negotiation. And the city of Los Angeles, which gives nothing without taking something back, was paying attention. There is a moment in every relationship where love stops feeling equal. Not because affection disappears, but because progress does. One person begins to move forward, the other stays still. And suddenly, love is no longer about connection, it's about balance. This was the moment Julian and Eleanor entered without realizing there was no way back. Julian's break didn't arrive dramatically. It arrived through an email he almost didn't open. A small independent label based in Pasadena had heard one of his recordings. Not the polished versions, not the simplified ones. The raw piano piece he uploaded late one night, recorded on borrowed equipment, played imperfectly but honestly. They didn't promise fame. They promised opportunity, a short residency, paid performances, exposure to the right rooms. For the first time in years, Julian wasn't chasing something invisible. Something was reaching back. He didn't celebrate loudly. He sat at his kitchen table, staring at the email, feeling a quiet fear creep in because opportunity demands change. That same afternoon, Elena waited in a hallway outside a casting office in Studio City. The role was small, the competition wasn't. She waited 2 hours. When her turn came, she performed exactly as rehearsed. The casting assistant smiled, said the familiar words. Elena left knowing what silence felt like. By the time she got home, Julian's message about the residency was waiting. She smiled when she read it. A real smile. She told herself this mattered, that his win was their win. But later that night, alone in her room, the smile faded. Because celebration is harder when you're standing still. Julian's schedule began filling. Rehearsals, meetings, late nights across the city. Elena's schedule stayed open, too open. She adjusted around him, not consciously, not resentfully, just naturally. She waited up more often, cancelled auditions that conflicted with his shows, told herself this was temporary. Julian noticed, not the sacrifice, but the quietness that followed it. Their conversations changed shape, less dreaming, more logistics. Love didn't disappear, it recalibrated. One night after a performance in Highland Park, a producer approached Julian. Different tone, different promise, more money, more exposure, but conditions? A hybrid sound, shorter compositions, more accessible. This wasn't survival money, this was direction-changing money. Julian didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He went home carrying the weight of choice, and choice changes people before decisions are even made. Elena sensed the shift, not through words, through absence. Julian was there, but distracted. Present, but elsewhere. When she spoke about auditions, his encouragement felt practiced. When he spoke about music, she felt like an audience member. They were together but not aligned. One night, Elena opened her notebook, the one where she tracked auditions. She realized something quietly terrifying. She had stopped writing dates, not because auditions stopped, but because she stopped believing they mattered. There are conversations couples avoid because they sense the answer will hurt. Julian and Elena entered that silence, not arguing, not confronting, just pausing. They sat together one night on Julian's fire escape, the city humming below them. Neither spoke, because speaking would have required admission. That love was becoming uneven. What Julian and Elena didn't know yet was that the next decision would not feel dramatic. It would feel reasonable. And reasonable choices are the most dangerous ones of all, because they don't feel like endings. They feel like progress. Every relationship has a moment where one word quietly rewrites everything. Not goodbye, not I'm done, just yes. Yes to opportunity, yes to momentum, yes to becoming someone new. Julian said that word before he understood what it would cost him, and Eleanor felt the cost before she understood why it hurt so much. Julian accepted the offer 2 weeks later, not impulsively, not recklessly, carefully. The producer's studio was in Culver City, a renovated warehouse filled with glass walls and soft lighting, the kind of place that made ambition feel inevitable. The contract wasn't exploitative, it was strategic. A 6-month collaboration, paid sessions, exposure beyond small venues. There were conditions, shorter compositions, a blended sound, subtle changes, nothing that sounded like betrayal, just evolution. Julian told himself he could protect the core of his music while adjusting the edges. That integrity and compromise could coexist. That love would understand. Elena didn't hear about the contract immediately, not because Julian hid it, but because timing never aligned. When he finally explained, he spoke with optimism, with relief, with the cautious excitement of someone who had spent years being overlooked. Elena listened. She smiled. She asked the right questions. But something inside her folded inward, because this wasn't just an opportunity. It was a direction, and she hadn't been asked whether she could follow it. That night, Elena went home alone. She stood in the shower longer than usual, letting the water drown out thought. Support came easily. Belief did not. Julian's life accelerated. Morning meetings in Culver City, evenings rehearsing with session musicians, weekends performing at venues that suddenly mattered. His phone stopped being silent. Elena's didn't. Her auditions became fewer, more competitive, less forgiving. She picked up extra shifts at the coffee shop, learned to sleep in fragments. She still showed up for Julian, still attended shows, still listened to rough cuts, but she was no longer inside the dream. She was watching it, and watching is lonelier than waiting. Power never announces itself. It enters quietly. Julian started deciding schedules, not intentionally but by necessity. Elena adjusted, again. Not because she wanted to, but because resistance felt selfish. Julian spoke about what's next. Elena spoke about what if. Their language changed. So did their silence. When Julian talked about music, Elena listened like someone afraid of interrupting. When Elena talked about acting, Julian listened like someone already late for something else. They were still kind. That was the most painful part. There was something Elena stopped sharing, not intentionally. Gradually, a casting director she admired had suggested she consider relocating, not far, Atlanta, Vancouver, New Mexico, cities where opportunity moved faster. Elena never mentioned it, because the timing felt cruel, because Julian had just begun to arrive, because love teaches people to minimize themselves quietly. Despite the progress, Julian felt a strange dislocation. The studio sessions were efficient, professional, but something felt thinner. The music moved faster. The silences disappeared. He told himself this was growth, but late at night, alone at his piano, he returned to older compositions, slower, messier, truer. He wondered briefly who he was becoming, and whether Elena recognized this version of him. One evening, after a small industry gathering in West Hollywood, they returned to Julian's apartment. They stood in the narrow kitchen, lights dim, city noise leaking through the windows. For a moment, neither spoke. They looked at each other as if seeing something newly unfamiliar. Not worse, just different. Love was still there, but it had changed shape. Some realizations don't arrive as thoughts, they arrive as fatigue. Elena was tired of adjusting. Julian was tired of explaining. Not to each other, to themselves. They still held hands, but it felt ceremonial, like honoring something already shifting away. Neither Julian nor Elena knew that the next opportunity would not ask politely. It would demand a choice, one that love could not soften, one that would finally answer the question they had both been avoiding. Who gets to grow and who gets left behind? There comes a point in some relationships where love stops being a feeling and becomes a question. Not a romantic one, a logistical one. A question that sounds like adulthood but feels like loss. Can we keep doing this without one of us disappearing? Julian and Elena were about to find out. Elena received the email on a Wednesday morning. She was at the coffee shop in Burbank halfway through a double shift when her phone vibrated against the counter. She didn't open it immediately. Hope had trained her not to rush. But during her break, sitting on stacked milk crates behind the shop, she read it. A casting coordinator she'd met months earlier had forwarded her profile. A limited series, supporting role, relocation required. Atlanta, 6 months. Option to extend. It wasn't fame. It was momentum, the kind that doesn't knock twice. Elena read the email 3 times. Her hands didn't shake. That scared her. Elena didn't tell Julian that night. Not because she was hiding it, but because she wanted to understand what it meant without him first. She walked home instead of taking the bus, past streets she knew by memory. Every step felt like crossing an invisible border. She asked herself questions she had avoided for years. What if I stop waiting? What if I choose movement over proximity? What if love is no longer the priority? That last question stayed with her. That same day, Julian was in Culver City, inside a soundproof studio, Surrounded by people who spoke in timelines and deliverables, he was praised, corrected, redirected. His music was improving technically, but something inside him resisted the polish. During a break, Julian checked his phone. No message from Elena. He noticed the absence immediately. Success sharpens awareness. They met later that night at a quiet Thai restaurant near Los Feliz, a place they'd been to dozens of times. Nothing about the setting suggested an ending. Elena told him, simply, no dramatic build-up, no framing. Julian listened carefully. He didn't interrupt. He didn't react the way she expected. He asked practical questions, timelines, logistics, return options. It felt professional. That frightened both of them, because this wasn't a fight. It was an evaluation. They didn't say, if you go, I'll feel abandoned. If you stay, you'll resent me. If I ask you to wait, I'll shrink you. If you leave, I'll lose us. Instead, they spoke cautiously, respectfully, like people negotiating something fragile. Love was still present, but it was no longer leading. They didn't go home together, not angrily, intentionally. Julian stayed at his apartment. Elena walked alone. She passed a movie theatre playing trailers for lives that weren't hers. She realized something quietly devastating. She had already made her decision. She was just waiting for permission she wasn't going to get. Julian sat at his piano that night. He played nothing from his current projects. He returned to older compositions, pieces Elena used to sit beside him and listen to. He remembered the way she used to watch not critically, but fully. For the first time, Julian considered slowing down, turning something down. But success, once accepted, doesn't forgive hesitation. And fear whispered something dangerous. What if this is the only window? They met again 2 days later at a park near Silver Lake, morning light, joggers passing, life continuing. Elena told him she was going, not angrily, not apologetically, honestly. Julian didn't try to stop her. That hurt more than resistance would have. They talked about love like something separate from logistics. They acknowledged the truth neither wanted. Staying together now meant one of them pausing. And pausing, for either of them, felt like self-betrayal. They didn't stop loving each other. They stopped being able to grow together. The end didn't come with promises to stay friends. It came with gratitude. They held each other longer than necessary, as if memorizing weight, as if touch could preserve something time would not. Then they let go, quietly, no witnesses. As Elena boarded her flight weeks later, she didn't look back. Not because she wasn't hurting, but because she was finally moving. As Julian walked back into the studio that same day, he felt something close behind him. Not a regret, absence. And absence, once noticed, never leaves quietly. People talk about moving on as if it's a destination, as if one day you wake up and the past no longer follows you. But the truth is quieter. You don't leave love behind. You carry it into new rooms and notice its absence only when there's space for it. This is what happened after Julian and Elena chose themselves. The first year passed without ceremony. Elena settled into Atlanta, in a modest apartment near Old Fourth Ward, close enough to the studios to walk when traffic collapsed. Her days filled quickly, table reads, blocking rehearsals, 12-hour shoots that left her exhausted and alive. She learned new routines. Coffee alone in the morning, late dinners eaten standing up, phone calls that went unanswered because she was finally needed somewhere. She missed Los Angeles less than she expected. That surprised her. Across the country, Julian remained in Los Angeles. His career expanded. The Culver City studio renewed his contract. His compositions appeared in places he hadn't imagined. Streaming credits, festival mentions, invitations that carried weight. He moved out of Echo Park into a quieter place near Atwater Village. Bigger windows. Better silence. The city rewarded him. But reward is not the same as fulfillment. Neither of them reached out, not once, not out of pride, not out of anger, out of respect. They followed each other's progress indirectly, a mention here, a credit there, enough to know the other was alive, not enough to interfere. And yet both of them felt the same unsettling thing. Success arrived without the person who understood what it cost. Julian would finish a piece and instinctively turn, as if someone should be there to hear it. Elena would wrap a scene and feel the urge to explain why it mattered. There was no one to explain it to. Time was supposed to dull the edges. Instead, it clarified them. Julian realized something uncomfortable. He missed the version of himself that Elena knew, not because that version was better, but because it was witnessed. Elena realized something equally painful. She missed being seen before she had proof, before success validated her. They both wondered the same thing at different times. Was that love about timing? Or was it about becoming? 2 years in, Elena was offered a lead role. Not glamorous, not massive, but central. The kind that builds careers quietly. She signed without hesitation. But that night, alone in her apartment, she felt something unexpected. Grief. Not for Julian. For the life that could no longer exist. Because success had changed her. And she wondered briefly, dangerously, whether she had changed too much. Julian began composing differently again. Slower, less polished. Pieces that reminded him why he started. The studio didn't object. They trusted him now. But trust felt hollow, because trust without intimacy is transactional. One evening, Julian declined an industry event. Instead, he walked alone through Griffith Park. The city stretched below him, bright and indifferent. For the first time, success felt heavy. 3 years after they separated, Julian flew to Atlanta for a scoring session. He didn't know Elena was in the city. Elena didn't know Julian had arrived. They passed within blocks of each other without knowing. Different lives. Same streets. That night, Elena felt restless. Julian felt unsettled. Neither understood why. Some connections don't end. They echo. Neither imagined reunion. That wasn't the fantasy. The fantasy was simpler. A conversation. A recognition. A moment where the past was acknowledged without reopening it. Julian imagined explaining the music he made now. Elena imagined explaining the woman she had become. Both wondered whether the other would still recognize them, and both feared the answer. 5 years after they separated, Julian received an invitation, a small private event, a celebration of independent artists, location listed, Los Angeles, Silver Lake, the same neighborhood where everything began. And Elena's name appeared quietly on the guest list, not as a reunion, as coincidence. And coincidence, when loaded with history, is never just that. Some reunions don't come with longing, they come with fear. Fear of discovering that the love you never forgot no longer recognizes you. Julian and Elena were about to meet again. Not because fate intervened, because time finally stopped avoiding them. The event was held in Silver Lake, inside a converted warehouse now used as a private art space. Soft lighting, minimal crowd. Quiet prestige. Julian arrived early. He always did. 5 years had changed him. His posture was calmer, his confidence quieter. Success had settled into him without softening the edges completely. He scanned the room out of habit, not expectation. Then he saw her name on the program, printed plainly, no emphasis. And something in him tightened. Elena arrived later. She almost didn't come. The invitation had sat unopened for days, but curiosity outweighed caution. 5 years had changed her too. She moved differently now, more deliberate, less apologetic. She had learned how to take up space without asking permission. As she entered the room, she didn't look for Julian. She told herself it didn't matter. That lie lasted exactly 3 seconds. They were in the same room for nearly 10 minutes without noticing. 10 minutes where the past stayed dormant until it didn't. Julian turned. Elena looked up, and time did something cruel. It collapsed, not into romance, not into nostalgia, into awareness. They didn't rush toward each other. They didn't smile immediately. They just recognized. Not the people they were, the people they had become. They spoke cautiously, not because they were afraid, but because they were respectful. Their voices were familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. They exchanged surface truths, work, cities, time. What they didn't say hung heavier than what they did, because every sentence carried subtext. Look how far we've come. Look what it cost. Later, away from the crowd, they walked together. No destination. Silver Lake at night hadn't changed much. The street still curved the same way. The air still carried the same promise. But they were no longer inside the dream. They talked more freely now, about work, about loneliness, about the strange emptiness that arrives after success settles in. They didn't accuse. They didn't defend. They acknowledged. And acknowledgement was heavier than regret would have been. At some point, Elena stopped walking. Julian noticed immediately. She said what neither of them had ever said out loud. That leaving had been necessary, that staying would have broken her, that love had been real and still insufficient. Julian listened. Then he said his truth, that success had arrived, that it hadn't healed what he thought it would, that love had not failed, timing had. They didn't cry, they didn't touch. They stood there holding the weight of a shared history without trying to rewrite it. Here is the twist most stories avoid. They didn't want each other back, not because love was gone, but because they finally understood what that love was for. It wasn't meant to last. It was meant to prepare them for courage, for honesty, for becoming, and realizing that together was more intimate than any reunion fantasy. They parted quietly. No promises to stay in touch, no dramatic final look, just gratitude, the kind that doesn't ask for more. As Julian walked away, he felt lighter than he had in years. As Elena watched him go, she felt complete. Not because the story resumed, but because it finally resolved. Some people enter your life to walk with you forever. Others enter to teach you who you are before you walk alone. Julian and Elena were not each other's ending. They were each other's turning point. And that matters, because love doesn't always exist to be kept. Sometimes it exists to be survived with integrity intact. So here is the question this story leaves behind. If you met the love that changed you, years later, would you want them back, or would you finally understand why they left? Take a second and like this video. Share this story and subscribe. Thank you for being here.